next to what I came. Come tear down every idol, so this heart won't stray. Don't let me stray. I just wanna be your sanctuary, a dwelling place for grace and mercy. Keep sifting me till.
Well, good morning, everybody. Boker Tov. Welcome to the Threshing floor. Here we are once again on the LambNetwork.tv. So glad that you could join us. My name is Darryl Weinberg of Light to the Nations Messianic Ministries, and I am here with my partner in Kingdom cohorts, Leonie Johnson. Good morning, Miss Leonie. How are you?
Good morning. I am well. How are you?
Excellent, thank you. We have survived the election. Praise the Lord.
Hallelujah.
Man, oh man. I'll tell you something. Those activities are like gladiator activities. It's something else. But
you got your feet wet.
I did, and it was a really neat experience. Of course, as many know, I am very politically, I guess, aware and cognizant of the issues, but I'd never had any designs or inclination to run before. Obviously, that's something you have to feel called to do. And boy, oh boy, I felt called to do it this time. So, it was a great experience. And this morning, we have the privilege and pleasure of actually talking to someone about that whole experience. Someone who I met through this campaign, and now I consider to be a good friend. And I'd like to bring to the stage, as it were, Chelsea Hillier. Good morning, Chelsea.
Good morning, everyone.
Great to have you on.
Good morning.
You and I have been talking an awful lot on the phone over the past few weeks. You were kind of my lifeline as to what on earth am I doing, as I've never done this before. And, obviously you have a tremendous amount of experience. And so the reason why I've asked you on is because I think you have a really cool story, number one. But number two, I think it can help shed light kind of on how God deals with politics. And just a bit of background on Chelsea. So she's the daughter of Randy Hillier, who is a member of provincial parliament, which is what I was running for. And, we did fairly well in this election, considering I was late to the starting gate. Getting over 500 votes was pretty good. But your dad was a member of provincial parliament for 15 years, was it?
That's right.
So you grew up in a political, so you're a PK. Pastor's kid, you're a politician's kid. And now you didn't grow up in a believing home, and yet you found your way to faith through, a challenging journey.
Yeah.
And how that has shaped your life now. But also, I wanted you to share a little bit about what you saw happening in this political process, because this was a different election than I think anything you've been part of before.
Very much, yeah.
I'm excited to hear what your perspective is on that. So why don't you kind of start at the beginning and give us a bit of background on yourself and what it was like growing up as Randy's daughter?
Yeah, so one thing that people don't realize is that my father wasn't actually elected until I was 22 years old. And I had already been out of the house at that point for the better part of 5 years, going to school and all of that. But that said, I certainly did grow up in sort of an unconventional political household, I suppose I'll say. I have 3 brothers, and one older, 2 younger, and my mom and dad are still together. And, we grew up in a really rambunctious and chaotic home. But, we always, every single night, sat down for dinner together as a family. It was, we were not allowed to get out of that. And that's really where the politics of my family started. So was at our dinner table. And, at the time I didn't think it was weird, but, now I know that it's very strange for people that, my brothers and I would like make up sort of little like political and historical games to play, like questions to ask each other at the dinner table. And we would discuss different topics. That's where sort of history and politics, converge. And so we would talk about different forms of government and, different dictatorships in the world and, all of that kind of stuff. And my dad was obviously the driving force of that. If my mom never had to hear about politics again in her life, she'd be the happiest person in the world. But anyway, my dad really, really encouraged all of us to be really politically engaged and knowledgeable in history. So, and, so I can go on a bit. When things really changed in my house, in my home, was when I was about 15. Both my parents at the time had been working for the federal government. My dad was an electrician, so he was a project manager with Public Works. And my mom was a clerk with Transport Canada. And my mom ended up leaving her career first. She never wanted to be a career woman. She just wanted to stay home with her kids. And so she left. And then when I was 15, my dad left his job, which was a very good job that he really enjoyed. But he was called to do something different. So he started a really small organization called the Lanark Landowners Association, which then grew into the Ontario Landowners Association, and was, at its height, it was huge. So that was all about protecting private property rights, or actually bringing private property rights into our Constitution, because it's not there. And so his activism at that time really sort of, exploded politics in our house. Like it became not just at the dinner table, it became every minute of every day, basically. Yeah. And then that same year I went to work for my older brother, and I both went to work for our MP. And we both worked in politics from that time. Well, my brother even longer than me, but we worked in politics through university, basically. So yeah, that's kind of the Coles Notes of the politics of the Hillier family.
And then your dad was elected in what year was it?
2007. He was elected for the first time. So that was, he had left. So he sort of reached the end of what he felt he could accomplish with the landowners, and felt time to sort of pass the torch and find something else to do. And so he decided to run for the nomination for the Conservative Party, the Ontario Conservative Party. It was a long shot. He was not supposed to win that nomination at all. In fact, the party did everything they could to make sure that he didn't win.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. And so you've got some Irish Scottish background.
Yes.
So faith-wise, what was the flavor of the day in your home?
So faith-wise was, my dad used to read us Bible stories when we were children. And he would tell us that, like, these are stories. It was never that this is the word of God, right? It was, these are stories, and they're important stories for you to know, because this is how we build a moral framework. So, that kind of reminds me of one of my favorite books, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. who, makes that argument that there is no morality if there is no God. And so now my dad didn't make that connection at the time when we were young, but I think that he's, he can see that now. But otherwise, I actually have a funny story to tell about my weird family. So myself and my 3 brothers were all baptized as infants. My older brother, here's the story. Here's the story.
Baptized as Catholic?
No. Actually, so my older brother and I were baptized Anglican.
Okay.
And then my mom somehow came to the conclusion that actually Anglicanism is basically the same as Catholicism, and she didn't want to have anything to do with it. So she had my 2 younger brothers baptized Presbyterian. So it was really like, we weren't baptized because my parents were God-fearing people. We were baptized because my mom thought it was a nice and pretty tradition. Yep. That's the reality of the situation. And even when I had my own kids, like my kids aren't baptized. But when I was pregnant with my first son, my mom was like, we have to start thinking about his baptism. And I was like, I'm not getting my kid baptized. And she was like, you have to. I said, well, why? And she said, well, you have to because that's what we do. It's tradition. People expect it, and I'm much more like, I suppose the churches that I've been to in the many years since, I'm quite happy with my children getting to a place where they choose to be baptized, which I'm sure that they will, because they're both incredibly faithful believers in the Lord. So, yeah. So anyway, that's the weird baptism story of myself and my brothers.
But you had a somewhat troubled younger years, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. And so I share a little bit about that.
Yep, sure. So where to start with that one? Well, I met my first husband, who has passed away since. I met him when we both worked in a bar. Mm-hmm. We both spent many, many, many years working in bars. And anyway, but, we loved each other greatly. And we had our first son in March of 2014. Mm-hmm. And I thought I was quite naive at the time. Anyway, I thought everything was going swimmingly, but it turned out that he had been struggling with substance abuse for many years, and I had no idea until after our son was born, when I was home now with a baby, and my expectations of my husband had changed, right? And so then I had time to start seeing what was going on,
right?
So anyway, it was rough. And however, I was very quickly pregnant again. And we had our next son not quite a year and a half later, in August of 2015. Mm-hmm. And then when my youngest son was 7 weeks old, my husband went to jail for the first time. So that was a very difficult period, to say the least.
Right.
But that actually it became the catalyst for how I found God and faith. So for that, I'm incredibly grateful. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I can go on, but if you have any questions about that.
No, please continue.
So, life carried on. I ended up having to go back to work when my youngest son was 5 months old because I needed money. So did that. Eventually, his name was Tim, by the way. I brought this. This is his, if you guys can see it, this is his Bible. I got to go back. Timothy James Shepherd. eventually, he was released from jail and he came back to live with us, and things didn't necessarily get better. So for the next few years, it was kind of a cycle of him in and out of rehab and another stint incarcerated.
Mhm.
And but in the last rehab that he went to, which was a great one, he had to do 5 meetings a week. So these meetings could be, NA, AA, smart recovery, the list went on. And one of the things that they would count as a meeting was church. So at the time he was in rehab, he wanted to, he got his weekend passes and he wanted to come back and live with us on the weekends. And I said, okay, well, you can, but you have to attend a meeting. Like every single weekend, you have to attend one meeting. And he agreed to the terms. And so he ended up coming and living with us every weekend. And the first weekend, I said, well, what meeting are you going to go to this weekend? I had already looked up like where all the NA and AA ones were in the town that we lived in, and where there was smart recovery and everything like that. And he said, well, I think I'd like to go to church. And I was floored. It was the last thing I ever expected. And he said, I also want you and the boys to come with me. And I said, I'm not going anywhere near church. This isn't that long, like, I guess in hindsight, it feels like a lifetime ago, but this was only 2017. So anyway, but he was adamant that this is what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, well, you can take the boys, but I'm not going with you. And I researched the churches in the town that we lived in, and I found one that looked like, in my opinion, interesting, or, that had a good, like a fun Sunday school for the boys. There was going to be lots of worship music and everything like that. So I thought, okay, well, here's the church you can go to. And it was really close to our home. And so they went, and I just stayed home and did my own thing. And he came back, and he was transformed by that first experience in church. And he just sat down and he told me how amazing it was. And he said, you don't have to keep coming with me, but please just come once and see what you think. And I thought to myself, okay, if I want to actually support this man in his recovery, then, and this is one of the things that he's asking for, then I should do it.
Right.
So I went the next week, and it was amazing. It was probably the most transformational experiences of my life. It was nothing like what I expected. The sermon that day was, I'll never forget it, was about Genesis 1, and how at the end of every day, God looks at what he has accomplished, even though the job's not finished. And he says, and it was good. And so that was what the sermon was. And I was like, oh my gosh, I get chills every time I talk about it. I have chills right now.
Yeah.
It was so it was so affirming. And I won't say that I became a believer that day. Okay. Because that would be a lie, but it certainly changed my life and allowed me to, get on the trajectory of becoming a very staunch and firm believer in the Lord. So, yeah. So I'll do a shout out. Can I do a shout out to that church?
Sure.
Okay. So that church that transformed my life, and Tim's as well, I'd argue, and certainly my kids, is All Nations Church in Carleton Place, Ontario. And the lead pastor there, who is also, he plants these churches all across the world, actually. His name is Steve Wilkins, and he is just an incredible man. I'll say.
Amen.
Yeah.
Wow.
Amen.
So, yeah.
So, so you're on your journey to faith. Your husband is absolutely transformed. But then tragedy strikes.
Yeah. Well, he definitely, like, you know, he had some relapses. So even though, you know, he had really embraced God and faith, he was never quite able to completely break free from, you know, the things that he was struggling with. But I will say, like, so I moved, so he was incarcerated again after that. So that was, you know, after he had been to rehab and we had been going to church every week. He ended up back in jail, and that this time for a longer stint. So when he went to jail, I sort of was like, I don't know, like, what do I do now? And now we're in COVID, right? And so I basically just dropped everything, picked my kids up, put them in the car, and we drove down to a city I had never been to before, which is London, Ontario. And we decided to live in London. I don't know why. I can guess why, and I'll tell you sort of the story there. So we ended up there totally accidentally. And but I had a friend down there who was originally from the town of Elmer, Ontario.
Yep.
With a Mennonite background. And so anyway, and at this time, Henry Hildebrandt from the Church of God was starting to make, you know, big impacts. And I knew he had already spoken to my dad. So one Sunday I decided that I was going to go see what the big deal was at the Church of God. And that was basically a second transformation. I'll tell you, the Hildebrandts and that whole experience, going to church through COVID, being locked out of the building, having outdoor service, just the amazing community that exists within that church. I mean, you know, at some point they were getting like 1,000 people there every Sunday, and the core congregation there, they made lunch for 1,000 people every single Sunday. So we would be at church from, 9 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the Hildebrandts are wonderful, incredibly close friends of mine now. I absolutely adore that entire family. And they really helped to strengthen my faith. And so I don't think it's an accident that I ended up in London for really no reason at all. And on a whim. I think that was part of it. I needed to experience that true, real community that comes from church, because that was something that I didn't necessarily experience at All Nations. I always kind of felt like an outsider, but at Church of God, like it was immediate. I actually so I've since remarried, but I brought my second husband down to Church of God a few weeks ago, and he could not believe, he was mind blown. You know, just like the welcome, the love, like, and like the real sincere love that these people show, right?
Right.
So that was a really cool experience to get him to see that. So anyway, then then I ran in the federal election in 2021 in that riding where Church of God is. And I thought that was a whirlwind campaign at 36 days. Doesn't hold a candle to what we just did. But anyway, after the election was over, I was feeling a little bit deflated and thought that maybe the best thing to do with my boys was to go home and see my parents. I had kept my house in Lanark County the whole time I was away. So we moved back into our home, and then we started going to, so then now, you know, shortly after Tim was released from prison, moved back in, and we started going to another church called Bethesda. And it was started by a Methodist reverend who's also one of my favorite people. I call him Pastor Bruce, but he always scolds me and tells me that I need to call him Reverend North. But again, COVID is still going on. The churches still have all these restrictions, you know, the masking still in place, all of that stuff. And Reverend North, who runs his own his Methodist church, he wanted to give an opportunity to, you know, people like myself, like to non-compliant people, to continue going to church. So he started a Sunday night service in the small village of Lanark. And so Tim and I started going to that. And then Reverend North, Reverend North, you know, he would come over and do Bible study with Tim and I. And he got Tim to start going to men's dinners and, you know, or men's breakfast and all of that stuff. And really like actively got Tim engaged with the community, which was awesome. And anyway, so, you know, by the time Tim passed away, he was quite strong in his faith. And yeah, he died in a just tragic random car accident one morning. So that was quite a shock. But you know what? Like, I don't know if I could have gotten through it without God. But also like, I didn't know how to tell my kids. I couldn't even speak the words. Right. And so what did I do? I called up Reverend North, and he's the one who told my kids that their dad had passed away. And it was such a great experience. I know that sounds weird to say, like saying that it was a great experience for someone to tell my kids that their dad had passed. But my kids were just like, they knew Reverend North so well, right? And they were so comfortable with him.
Yeah.
That they were like, oh, okay. So now Daddy's with God. And you know, Bruce was like, yep, that's exactly where he is. And they had that talk, you know, and like my kids have never really, like, they loved their dad, but they've never really shed a tear, because for them, they don't even question. Like, there's no question for them, right? They know exactly where their dad is, and they can talk to him anytime. So that's been an incredible blessing.
Wow. Wow.
And then a couple months after Tim died, so he died May 31st of the years. The COVID years are so weird. So it was 3 years ago, 2022, I guess. And anyway, so then we had both been planning to be baptized down in the river. And so Tim didn't get there, but I was baptized, I think, 2.5 months later. And Bruce did some, he looked for some rare scripture to allow me to be baptized on Tim's behalf as well. So we did that as well.
I'd be interested to know what he found.
I can't remember what it was. I could text him and ask him, but he'll be busy this morning. But there was, he had, you know, and he told the congregation, like, you know, this is not normal. And like, you know, we know the Mormons do this and we're definitely not Mormons, but here's the scripture that I'm using to do this. But that was also an overwhelming experience to be baptized, and especially to be baptized in a river, in the robes and everything. It was awesome.
When my son was baptized, he got baptized at 6, and we were up in Peterborough at the time. So we did it in the Otonabee River up there. And I think we had about 8 people that day. And, you know, sometimes you got to do 3 bubble baptisms, you know, just to make sure. But yeah, and you know, from a biblical perspective, it's supposed to be in running water. It's supposed to be living water. And so that's why with the mikvah, you have stairs going down one way and you have them coming up the other. And then there's a flow of water. It's not stagnant like we do in tanks today. But, you know, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, that's right. I'm, and I know that like I know that it's biblically sound, and of course, like Reverend North, he'll only baptize people in in the summer because he will only do it in the river. But where was I going with that? But you're right. You just have to, however people get there and however it's going to happen, then that's what's important.
Well, I think doing it outside now would make it interesting anyway.
Well, it could be. You might have less people signing up, but
Do a little polar bear baptizing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions you have on this testimony, Leonie?
I was just wondering, and how did you find love again after that very adventurous first marriage? Because that sounds like the kind of situation that most women would just be running in the opposite direction and say, never again, I'm not doing this. That's enough. But it seems like not so long ago, you were blessed with another husband. And so I'd like to know how that came about.
Sure. Yeah. So actually, when Tim died, I said, that's it. I was like, I'm not like, and it wasn't even so much that like I was running in the other direction. I think that like a lot of my aversion to the idea of finding love again was that I felt like it was, I felt that I was sort of betraying Tim. Mm-hmm. And so that was really like, that was, I think, what was in my heart at that time. Anyway, so then you guys will laugh at me, but I met my second husband on Twitter. So I was very active because of my political involvement. I was very active in a lot of like DM groups on Twitter. And anyway, and there's a lot of us still, like, we've all met in person. We have a get together a couple times a year. Like, it wasn't just like anonymous people online, although he kind of was anonymous, but basically we had been friends for about a year. So he would call me a couple times a week and we just talk about what was going on in the world and all of that stuff. And then I was like, well, why don't you come? He was a fan of my dad, and so I was like, why don't you come down and like hang out and meet Randy, and we can go to Scuttlebutt Lodge and all of that stuff. And anyway, he did, and then we kind of fell in love. And then I love him because he got me to move up to Sudbury. That's called true love. Oh. But anyway, it was through Twitter. I know that's like really random and silly, but that's how that happened. So, but it meant a lot to me that we had developed like quite a strong friendship over time. And when we met, it wasn't that I wasn't thinking of this, but God put him in my path, and I will say, thank the Lord. Like, by the time I met him, my life was not in a good place. I was struggling financially. I was still living in the Perth area, and I don't know, I'm sure you guys can imagine, but the community had really, really turned on my family over COVID. And I ended up, so I lost my job at the end of 2020 over now I complied with everything at work, but over my community non-compliance. So like, people started saying that they wouldn't come to this business because they saw me out without a mask on and stuff like that. And in a small town, it matters when people say things like that. So I lost that job. So that was before I went to London, came back. Anyway, so then 2 summers ago, I started working for another restaurant. Actually, the owners were Tim's best friends, and everything seemed to be going fine and well. And I walked in one day, and they told me to leave. And I never got an explanation from them, but I imagine that it was a similar impact of people just not liking me because of what I did during COVID. And so by the time I met James, okay. By the time I met James, I was wondering where I was going to go and what I was going to do. And, and then all of a sudden he appeared. So there you go.
There you go. Wow. Okay.
Sorry about that. My battery went down.
Oh, that's okay.
But I was hearing you.
I thought you were still on, and yeah.
My next question, though, is how did you get into politics? Because you said you ran. Is this your second time running?
So I didn't run this election. So the way that it happened in 2021 was the PBC actually reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to run in my dad's riding.
So for those who don't know, that's the People's Party of Canada.
Yes.
It's not one of the three mainstream parties, no. But the leader has been fighting for the causes of freedom ever since all this COVID nonsense started.
Yeah. So yeah, the People's Party reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to run in my dad's riding, and I said, I'd be mad to run in his riding. I said, you guys don't understand how hated we are now. And we had such a good network, community network for so many years there, but people just turned on a dime. It was wild. And yeah. I know we all have stories like that. But the scale of it was incredible. And so I said, I don't have a shot there. People they'll crucify me if I run there. And so I said, but I'm living down here, and so I'll run down here. And they said, well, we kind of already have a candidate. And I said, well, let's have a nomination process then. And we'll decide, we'll let the people decide who is going to be their candidate. And I won. And then it was off to the races. And it was a wonderful, amazing experience, I have to say. It was, now I think it took me about a year to get over it. But I learned a lot. I got to do a lot of really cool things. I brought two of my friends down to live with me. So one was my campaign manager. His wife was my social media / answering all the emails / scheduling person. And then I brought in another friend. And so we all lived together during this time. And my other friend was doing all of the videos and everything. So, and we were doing between 3 and 4 events per week. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people showed up. Our biggest one, I think, was actually 4,000 people showed up. And yeah, it was absolutely crazy. And everyone thought I was going to win. And some people still think that I did, but I'm not going to go there. But anyway, I did not win, but I did really well. I got 12.8% of the vote, which was, I think, the third highest for any candidate in the country. So that was crazy. And it kind of, reinvigorated my love for politics. I don't know why I have that illness, but I do. And but I took a lengthy break after that, and now I'm back in it, and I'm super, super excited to get going. I have so many ideas, and I'm really excited to be working with a party who is faith-based, You know, I don't know if I said this to Darryl before, but people who aren't, you know, of faith see religion or faith as like constricting somehow.
Yeah.
But I felt so free during this campaign because we're able to talk about, you know, about these issues and like make God the center of it. Like I can put scripture up on social media, you know, and anyway, it's been amazing. And I think so. Darryl's probably going to want to ask me about this campaign that we're in now because I'm looking at the time that we were just in.
Yeah. So talk about this. How did you and your dad get roped in? And talk a little bit about your roles, and then give us kind of an overview of what you saw happening that was unique about this campaign.
Yeah. So there's a long backstory to like how Darryl Sloan became the leader of the Ontario Party, and there was some involvement by my dad back in 2021, early 2022. There was lots of talk about, you know, what we were going to do with the provincial party and all of that stuff. So anyway, Derek ended up getting the party, which was great. And then my dad did not get involved at that time. He was he's still in the middle of it, but in the middle of like a really ridiculous and completely all-consuming criminal case, which was for, just so everyone knows, he moved a gate at the Freedom Convoy. And so he's been going through court over that for years now. So anyway, so he was out. I wasn't part of anything. And we were just sort of like taking time, I think, to sort of like, we all went through so much, right, over those years. And so we just needed to take time to, I call it like my dark period, where I just sort of like didn't talk to anyone. And my dad went through that a little bit as well. So anyway, then my dad called me like, what? I mean, it wasn't even 2 months ago, like maybe a month and a half ago. And he said, oh, I'm going down to talk with Derek about, you know, getting involved. So he talked to Derek, and Derek hired him as the campaign co-chair. And so he called me and just to tell me. And I said, oh, well, if you need any help with like just graphic templates or whatever, you know, let me know, you know, I'll help out. And that was my first mistake. So then I went on to the first campaign call that we had. And my dad, like, you know, there's 6 of us on the screen, or 7, whatever it was. And my dad's like, okay, daughter, so you're going to do all the social media. And I was like, what? That's not what I said. I'm like, I don't even like social media. Anyway, so then it was like, you're doing all the social media. And what do you say when you're told that in front of, you know, 6 other people? So anyway, I said, okay. And then it spiraled from there, where then it was, okay, you're going to be the point person for candidates on these issues. And you know, you're still going to be doing social media. Now you're going to be doing Derek's social media. Now you're also going to be doing, you know, flyers. Now you're going to be counseling the candidates who are having mental breakdowns. And next thing you know,
there were a few of those.
Next thing you know, I was working 10 to 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And my poor husband, who, you know, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I don't work. And, you know, I do the cooking and the cleaning and the laundry, and that's my job. So my poor husband was like, what is happening? But the thing is, he's political too. So he secretly liked it, even though he was struggling with it a bit. Yeah. But now that we're rocking, I like I said before, I have so many ideas, and I'm like really excited. And I think it was you, Darryl, that I was telling the other day that the night, so what the election was on the 27th. So that night I went to bed, and that like this information just got downloaded into my brain. And basically it's an entire vision for a strategic plan. And like I wrote in my sleep, I was like in my head writing policy documents and stuff like that, and just really developing out this plan that was downloaded into my head.
Mhm.
And again, like I have to think that was God, because normally you don't remember, like you might remember a dream for a bit,
Yeah.
but then it sort of dissipates into the ether, right? This one is like so locked into my brain. And like as soon as I woke up in the morning, I sat up and I looked at my husband and I was like, oh my gosh, I have it. I know how we're going to build this party. So I'm ready. When everyone else is ready, I'm ready. Yeah.
So what was different about this election? How did you see God moving? Because you and I had a number of conversations about that.
Yeah.
And I mean, even my experience, Leonie and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, where God says, you need to run. I mean, it was almost like I was getting a red mark on my forehead. And so, kind of unpack that for us a little.
So what I heard from, I would say, almost every candidate that I spent time talking to, everyone had the same story. They had this, so everyone said the same thing. They had this feeling like, someone's got to step up. Like someone has to, like, we need to have a candidate. And like, none of them were thinking of it, that it was going to be them. And then like, they all have a story about how like, all of a sudden it was like exactly what Darryl just said. Like God said, it's you. Now go do it. And it was so crazy because like I would talk to Darryl, basically every day. And the stories that I would tell him about what these people had experienced, Darryl's like, yeah, I've experienced that too. Like this was definitely the people that were brought together through this Ontario Party campaign were brought together specifically by God. And I don't think that no one doubts that at this point. And I'll give Derek credit for this too. Like by allowing this party to be a faith-based party, which is not necessarily a politically savvy it's not necessarily how politics works. By allowing that and really like standing true in his faith, he's allowed God to move through all of these people and bring them all together. And it's been an incredible blessing to get to meet all of these people. And like there's so many different stories from so many of the candidates about how they came to God. And like some of them are lifers and some of them are newbies, like but everyone agrees that they were moved to do this by God. And I firmly believe that God has a plan for this party.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I just want to go back a little bit. I have a question just to go back a little bit. So in 2021 you ran and you said you did not win, and it took you a year to get over that, but it was a good experience. Why did it take you a year to get over it?
Well, I think it took me a year to get over not just the election loss, but there was a lot of other things happening at that time. So again, we're still in COVID, which by that time, like I was really struggling just with the entire situation. Like how much more of this can we take, right? And then I got sued. And that was an absolute nightmare. In fact, I can say that I was sued, but I actually have a lifetime gag order. I am not allowed to speak about that case ever. So now you can Google it, and because the woman who sued me, she did like a lot of press over it. But anyway, I'm not allowed to speak about it. So then that happened. Then my husband died. then I didn't show up in court because it was 2 weeks after my husband died and I was catatonic. And then it, like it was sort of like things just sort of spiraled. And so the election seemed like the catalyst for like the spiraling to begin, right?
Mhm.
So that was it was a lot. There were a lot of factors. But certainly the election, and another part of that is that, following the election, all of these things were happening with like, being sued and then, whatever. And there was a lot of guilt that I felt at that time because instead of sticking around in London and carrying on with all of my wonderful supporters and like being there to encourage them and everything, I kind of like, I felt like I had abandoned them. And so that was guilt that I still live with some of that guilt today. It didn't feel good. Like it's not my general way of being to just flee, but that's what I did. And so that there were a lot of factors.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So
how did you feel about this last election?
Yeah,
I feel great. Like I can talk about some of the details if anyone cares to hear. I know most people just look at the raw numbers, right? And see that we got 25,000 votes and they say, oh, that's like nothing. We only ran 44 candidates. We had like basically, 2 weeks to run the entire campaign. Because our candidates, we were late, getting candidates because no one knew this was coming. So most of our candidates didn't get their paperwork in until the 13th, which was the deadline. So that means like February 14th was really when the campaign actually started. So to get 25,000 votes with 44 candidates in a 2-week period is excellent. The other thing is that the previous provincial election, we had run 105 candidates. And so in actual, like in percentage wise, we actually didn't lose votes. Of course, we did lose numbers, but we didn't actually lose a percentage of votes. I think it was menial anyway. And then, but our counterparts, the other sort of third conservative party, the New Blue. I'm not giving them any shade. It's just put numbers in context. They ran a full slate of candidates again, and they were actually much more prepared than we were, and they lost 30% of their vote. So I look at that and say, like, obviously there is trust in Derek as a leader. Like people are choosing where they're going to place their trust. And, I think that it's being placed in Derek. So that also Derek got the most votes of any third party leader in the province. We now have, I think, 9 funded ridings. So that's people who got over 2% of the vote. And the cool thing about this is that, like, often you see like clusters of, like, you'll see a party do really well in just one area, but our ridings that are now funded go from east to all the way west, which is great. So that's going to be a boon for us to be able to get those riding associations set up and then allow them to help the other people around them get their riding association set up. I should have brought water up. My mouth's getting dry.
We got about a minute left, so you're almost done.
One of our candidates in Windsor West broke the top 3, so he was the third top candidate in that election. And but I think it's just like, I think because of this belief in God, this faith in God that the people in this party have, like, I feel really like we're going to be able to accomplish something really cool in the coming years.
Excellent. That's
Yeah.
good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel the same way. And both my wife and I, she is not political. She just kind of looks at me and says, he knows a lot about that stuff. I'm just, she's got her own thing, but both of us really feel that there's a need to start building a party of faith, and we need to start bringing God back into the political realm. And so we're excited to be doing that. Chelsea, it's been wonderful to hear your testimony. It's fascinating. And we're grateful that you were able to share some of those experiences with us this morning.
Well, I'm very grateful that you guys asked me to come on. This was wonderful.
And so we'll see what God has next.
That's right.
And so on that note, we wish everybody a wonderful week. Shavua Tov. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week here on lamnetwork.tv for the next installment of The Threshing Floor. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
Shavua Tov. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I won't run from the crushing. I'll hold on through the pain. What I lose means nothing.
If you missed today's show or want to watch it again, or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lamnetwork.tv, where you can find this show and all the other live Lamb Show archives in the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network.
I just wanna be your sanctuary, a dwelling place for grace and mercy. Keep sifting me till everything is on the threshing floor.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take a tour of the lamnetwork.tv website. I'm Darryl Weinberg, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
How can I ever complain? Forgive me, Lord. I just wanna be your sanctuary, a dwelling place for grace and mercy. Keep sifting me till everything is on the threshing floor. Let it fall on the threshing floor. Everything that's between